Well, hello, 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 hello. Hopefully, we are looking correct. Really hoping we are looking good and that we are able to be heard. Let's see. How do we sound, folks? Do we sound alright? Are we audible? Are we, good on that front? This is my first time really doing like actual ASMR with all of the first time on so many things I'm doing at the moment, so, be patient, be nice, don't bully me, bully Lenny instead. Yeah, there we go, whoops. Put my phone right there so I can keep track of chat, because PowerPoint, as it turns out, likes to hog monitors. Exactly, you have a reason to not go to work, just say you're on strike. That'll go over very well with them. Alrighty, I gotta try my hand at being actually educational today, while also not raising my voice or coughing or clearing my throat into the mic, which is why I've got a button on my loop deck to quickly mute myself. So, I've lured all of you under false pretenses. Today is not, in fact, Labor Day. It is, in fact, International Workers' Day. I fooled you. I fooled all of you. So that's, egg on your face, right? Today, I'm going to teach you a little bit about International Workers' Day. Things like what it is. Wait, hit the wrong button. There we go. See, already off to a rocky start. We're going to learn what International Workers' Day is, how it started, why there is a separate Labor Day in the US and Canada, what American labor has been up to, for the past century or so, we're just checking in on them. And then finally, what's so important about labor? Why does it matter? Why does this holiday exist? Why does any of this mean anything, So, I'm just gonna kind of do my little thing, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. I have pinned a message in the Twitch chat explaining that any sound redeems are currently paused, other than hydrate, but you won't be able to hear the hydrate. And oh my god, I just remembered something I forgot to do. One sec. I'm not pausing the stream or anything, it's fine. I just got to... I'm so professional, y'all. Alright, fixed it. Done. No throwing paper balls. I am also hoping to possibly put this on YouTube, so I may not be as, goofy, silly, chatty as I usually am, but, it's me, so I'll still be, pretty goofy, probably, so, So yeah, y'all let me know if there are any audio issues or other such things, because I can't see OBS right now, which is horrifying. Yeah, just let me know if there are any issues, and take careful, studious notes, because I adhere to the principle of you don't put all the info on the PowerPoint. That's just your highlights. You actually have to listen if you want to learn. So, if you want to pass the exam, you better click those pins and get to work. Good Lumi had better have her little, Blue's Clues pencil and paper, the little crayon and the pad. So, yeah, this is not going to be like your high school ass, pointing at the screen and reading off of it. This book is about guys who do stuff, Okay. Also, I'm not sure how to sit correctly for ASMR when I'm actually doing it live, because I don't know if you bend forward the right way, you kind of compress your lungs and you makes you shorter of breath when you're whispering. I don't know. We'll find out. It's all learning along the way, you know. So, let's see here. Reset that timer. There we go. You better be marking me on this presentation. This is a good presentation. Alrighty. So, let's dig in. Oh, also, further side note. One sec. Sorry that I had a burp coming, but I didn't because gas axi. Okay. A lot of what I'm going to be describing is about the US or comes from an American perspective because that's what I'm most familiar with, and that's kind of the point of this whole deal, is to really talk about American labor, why it did a weird thing with International Workers' Day, what's been going on with it, and things like that. So, yeah, I'm not going to be able to touch on like every single country or every single facet of organized labor in the world and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, Americans, this one's for you at the middle of the afternoon while you're at work, and Canadians, I guess you're here too. So, basically the same, right? Alrighty, so, what is Labor Day or International Workers' Day? Well, Labor Day / International Workers' Day is a holiday that specifically celebrates workers, as the name might imply. It is marked with celebrations, parades, demonstrations, etc., to sort of show the strength, unity, and power of labor as a force, as opposed to business owners, managers, not even really managers, mostly business owners. As a further note, I'm going to avoid, one more thing I forgot to add, I'm going to avoid using certain buzzwords that I tend to use a lot, because those buzzwords tend to cause people to, like, when they hear the right term, they just kind of file that away in their brain and, like, stop listening, because they're just like, oh, it's another one of these. So, I'm going to try my hardest not to use those words and to find other ways to describe things so that it actually sinks in. So this is a holiday that pretty much celebrates labor. It's generally, in most of the countries that celebrate it, it's a day off one way or another, either as a paid vacation day or as a national holiday. It's basically just there to celebrate workers and what they accomplish and how they, sort of make the world go round. So, how did this come to be, this weird little holiday? Well, it was chosen by the American Federation of Labor to commemorate the 1886 Haymarket Massacre. Haymarket was it's a square in Chicago, Illinois. This particular massacre took place on May 4th of 1886, but the demonstrations started on the 1st. The Haymarket Affair, or Haymarket Massacre, multiple names, was sort of the climax of the so-called Great Upheaval of post-Reconstruction. That's the process by which America tried to rebuild after the Civil War here in the 1860s. Post-Reconstruction unrest. There was lots of things going on at the time. There were labor struggles. There were constant economic downturns. There was civil strife. There was all kinds of stuff going on. So this was kind of when all that really came to a head in a really public way. So what happened there was a peaceful rally taking place in Haymarket in support of workers who were striking for the 8-hour day, which was, up to that point, unheard of. That wasn't a thing yet. Hours could go on up to like 12 hours. There was no real delimitation, which was why this posters like this proliferated at the time, which is the idea of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what you will. The idea of giving people more personal time to be disperse the crowd, and an unknown assailant threw a dynamite bomb at the police, which killed a few people and caused the police to retaliate even more violently against them. After the attack, 8 anarchists were convicted of having thrown the bomb, planned it, caused it, etc., having killed people, despite a lack of evidence. This isn't even like a conspiracy theory or like it was unfair. 2 subsequent governors pardoned them of their crimes because it was such a widespread, controversy as to how poorly the trial was handled and how it was described as a miscarriage of justice at the time. The closest thing to real evidence for any of them being involved was that there was evidence that one of the 8 may have built the bomb, but not thrown it, and only 2 of the defendants were at the Haymarket at the time of the bombing. So, historians even debate if the bomb may have been thrown by an agent provocateur, as in someone trying to provoke a response or give excuse for what happened after. 7 of them were sentenced to death. 1 was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Governors commuted 2 of their sentences. 1 killed themselves in prison. It was a very grisly affair. But it was so important because that prompted international outrage to the point that when it was suggested by the AFL to mark a day celebrating labor on May 1st, which was the day of the Haymarket affair began, it was confirmed by the International Workers' Congress, and it was stated that that day would be a day of mass demonstration to pursue the 8-hour workday. And it really wasn't expected to become a thing. It was expected to just be a one-and-done sort of deal. So it was a little bit surprising when that became a recurring holiday. So, why is American Labor Day different? Well, in the 1900s, American politicians feared commemorating the Haymarket Massacre. They feared that what would happen if a massacre that was then characterized by police brutality and a miscarriage of justice that was even admitted on the part of the government in the form of those governors who pardoned them. They feared how that would look. Like, hey, let's remind everyone every year of that awful thing that happened and remind them why they have a reason to be angry and distrustful of us. It wasn't a good look. So, since there's already some debate as to which day the holiday should fall on in the U.S., American government people pushed towards September instead. On top of that, at the time, the Second Red Scare was occurring in the 1950s, and labor was being associated with so-called Bolshevism. It was being described as a violent, foreign, anarchistic, collectivistic, violent. That's what they kept on harping on about. Labor is a scary, violent force. Was their whole point. They sought very much to tie those two things together, and in truth, that wasn't entirely unfounded, as progressive, leftist, anarchist, anti-capitalist, etc. groups have all traditionally been very big on pro-labor. I mean, they are against the thing that labor suffers under, and they want better treatment for those workers. So, yeah. But the idea that labor would be inherently violent and would lead to, storming of the Winter Palace, but in Washington, was just fear-mongering. Furthermore, after that holiday was established, in September, there was a Loyalty Day enshrined on May 1st in the 1950s as direct opposition to International Workers' Day. Kind of a way of saying, any stragglers who did decide to celebrate Workers' Day on May 1st, well, you're not celebrating Loyalty Day. So are you not loyal? You're not celebrating the right holiday. Very dumb, very stupid, very 1950s. It was a whole deal at the time. You could just do that. It was wacky. Which brings us to, what has American labor been up to, actually? Like, you know, let's check in on the vibe. How's things been going for them? Have they been, how's the past century or so? Let's. I'm sure they're doing very well. So, in the early 20th century, we'll start from, 1900 onward. I already mentioned there had been a lot of unrest and economic blah blah blahs before this. The process of industrialization and the technological leaps that occurred at the turn of the century led to, mass industrialization, a shifting away from agricultural labor, especially given the no longer, let's say, profitability of previously extraordinarily exploitative forms of agricultural labor. It led to something called the Gilded Age, which was the era of robber barons, of massively wealthy fat cats sitting on top of empires founded on these newly expanding industries. You had people like Andrew Carnegie, who was, a steel magnate. You had J.D. Rockefeller, who founded Standard Oil. You had Cornelius Vanderbilt, who made his bank on railroads and shipping. Billionaires rose to prominence with the expansion of the rail industry, but also shipping in general. They also did this thing where, hi Davey, they also did this thing where they frequently feigned charity. They would give a little bit, or say it was virtuous to give money to the poor in order to prevent people from getting super mad at them. Because then they could say, well, hey, look, I'm one of the good ones. I give to the poor sometimes. So, you can't be mad at me. What, do you not like the poor? Sorry, couldn't tell if I was going to burp or not. I've got like a burp that's like stuck in limbo. It's not coming up. I'm trying to mute whenever I think it's coming, then it goes away. Very sad, very sad. Anyway, this era was marked by massive wealth inequality. Massive riches were accrued by those robber barons and were hoarded by them. 18% of all income went to the top 1% at the time. You also had things like massive pandemics and health epidemics. The Spanish flu, which is hilarious because the name of Spanish flu, it kind of just came from a desire to otherize it because the first cases were discovered in Kentucky. Like, no one really knows. I mean, it's easy to see, like, why, but, like, no one knows how anyone settled on Spanish for some reason. Because, like, it was very dumb. There were also, that Spanish flu killed 21 million people globally and 675,000 in the U.S., which contributed a ton to the dire straits of everyone at the time. Things were not, this was not an era of good vibes, so to speak. You also had recurring financial crises. Certain economic systems have a previously doubted, since proven true, tendency to fall, to collapse with regularity. It's a boom-bust cycle, as it might be put in an economics class. It is the tendency of the rate of profit to decline in other circles. That happened a lot. The multiple financial crises of the late 1800s continued into the 1900s, largely caused by the mismanagement of the post-Civil War Reconstruction, which generally occurred to the benefit of the wealthy. After the Civil War, there was a brief moment when it looked as if former slaves may actually be given the land that they had previously worked as slaves. There was a chance that this might lead to mass property redistribution, in a sense, because it was being expropriated from plantation owners and given to the people who actually worked it. Instead, at the last second, Andrew Johnson, out of just basically spite, reversed this and forced them to give back the land to plantation owners who then used their wealth to hire out poor sharecroppers, leading to essentially not quite slavery, but strongly indentured, wealth-based. I mean, you were given money, and they couldn't, like, physically harm you as much anymore, but that was about it. It created a new way of exploiting people. In addition, during the Civil War, the U.S. government had for the first time printed, quote-unquote, greenbacks, fiat currency not tied to the gold standard. It was previously expected and hoped that they would continue this, that they would separate from the gold value, from the gold standard. However, they reneged on that, returned to the gold standard. Greenbacks fell out of use, and it would be another century before we left the gold standard, which all of this meant basically a ton of wealth remaining in the hands of, or flowing even further upward into, the wealthy. Yeah, it's cool. Also, obviously, I mean, the big standout of this era was the Great Depression from the 1929 to 1939. Unemployment skyrocketed, peaking at over 20%. So, 1/5 of all eligible to be employed adults in the U.S. was unemployed, which is not good. This largely caused by the wealthy seeing their profits constricting, wanting to maintain their current level of profit. So, like, say you have $100 in your bank account, and you normally spend $50. Well, now the cost is going up. So, rather than continue to pay the $50 and have less money in your bank account, you just don't pay as much. You just don't pay $50 anymore. You pay $30. That was basically how people got screwed out of jobs, was a desire to maintain the same level of profit by cutting expenditures, which is the logical thing to do. It's just also terrible. And of course, this was the era of massive child labor, because they could be paid less. They could be expected to do more work. They were not as broken already by strenuous labor at the time. It was easier to hire them. They would be sent out because families needed food to feed the kids and they couldn't afford it at the time. So, like, yeah, go ahead and get your own money for own food. Of course, this is all stuff that we wouldn't really know anything about. Only boomers know anything about this sort of thing. I guess we'll never know what it's like to be part of that generation, but, we can only imagine. This all caused a spike in militant labor movements at the time because people were angry. They were fighting tooth and nail to keep their jobs, and they were angry that they had their jobs taken away. They were also angry after World War I that they had lost. Many veterans came back and did not have funding, did not receive the benefits they were supposed to receive, went back to a terrible job market after the temporary boom years of the early 20s. I think the burp finally came, I'm not sure. At least some of it did. I don't know. Yeah, so at that point, people were mad, and they started getting very angry when they couldn't get bread for themselves or their kids. And they started coming together to agree on why they were angry and who they were angry at. And this is all occurring against the backdrop of the 1917 Russian Revolution, which sent shockwaves across the world, because could that happen here? They didn't think that could happen, and it did. And in addition to it happening, it wiped out a bunch of very wealthy people's investments in Russia in things like oil and railroads, which were big Western investments in the country. there was a strong fear that that might spread to the U.S., especially given the ongoing turmoil there because of the similar issues that the Russian Empire faced in its last years, excluding the war, of course. So, this all led us to the bonus army, FDR, and the New Deal. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I do not remember much, if at all, about the bonus army in high school, and yet it is extraordinarily important to understanding how you got someone like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and how you got the New Deal. It also represents an interesting what-if scenario, or a lot of interesting what-if scenarios in American history. The bonus army was basically in 1932, jobless World War I veterans formed the Bonus Expeditionary Forces and marched on Washington to demand the bonuses promised to them by the 1926 World War Adjusted Compensation Act. They had been promised extra because at the time, in the early 20s, things were great. Let's give more to the vets. They needed it anyway, and then they didn't get it. So 20 to 40, estimates vary, 20 to 40,000 veterans and their families set up a sea of shacks and shantytowns around Congress, like physically in Washington. They just camped out there in abandoned buildings and homemade shacks and anything they could. And they demanded their needs be met, that they receive what they'd been promised. President Hoover declared that they had been organized and promoted by communists. Capitol Police tried and failed to clear them out. The army was called instead. General Douglas MacArthur, along with Eisenhower and Patton, two names that would become famous in World War II and afterward, led army troops using bayonets and tanks to push veterans out of the area. The public, the general, everyone sympathized with the bonus army because it was quite obviously that they had been promised something that they needed. They hadn't gotten it, and when they tried to make their demands heard, they had been violently attacked for it. And, of course, in the next election, they voted Hoover out of office and replaced him with FDR. Now, FDR understood which way the winds were blowing. He could see the rising tide of unrest embodied in something so frightening as the bonus army, which literally led to mass fires and open warfare in the streets of DC, essentially, for quite a while. He could see which way things were going if things didn't change quickly. He was not a real friendly to labor or left-wing ideas guy. He was one sec. He was very rich. He came from a very wealthy family. He had lots of connections with rich families and rich people. He wasn't son of the earth or anything. He was rich. He came from a New York business family. But he was approached by a coalition of organized labor leaders who informed him that they might not be able to stop their members from doing drastic things anymore if things didn't get better. They wouldn't do anything officially, but they couldn't speak for their constituents anymore given how drastic things were getting. So, he, in turn, realized there was no real way to squeeze this, and he forced business leaders with whom he had personal connections to accept temporary concessions to labor, to allow government to intercede, to help people, to make jobs, to hire people, to set up welfare programs. And the reason, and it may seem on its face as kind of a weird thing, that why would business leaders, it sounds generally they're bad and that's good, so that's one thing, but why do they specifically care so much if the government does these things? Well, the reason why is because if the government gives people more fair jobs, easier ways to make money and stay alive, they no longer have to accept the awful conditions that they were being given by businesses. Businesses were relying on being near starvation in order to feed you crap wages. If you have an option now, suddenly they don't have that dangling over you, and they have to pay you better if they want to be competitive. This led to the programs like the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the U.S. Work Program, the WPA, things like that, which generally helped rebuild, slowly but steadily, the U.S. economy, give people a way to make a living, helped stabilize things so they could start to turn around, and also sort of bought off labor. The risk of organized labor and pro-labor organizations and parties. Remember, this was a time whenever left-leaning and openly socialist or even communist politicians, etc., were still relatively open, even if they were generally not well received. They could run openly on the ticket, like Eugene V. Debs would run as a socialist candidate for presidency and win, I think, 1 million votes, actually. That was a thing you could do at the time. So there was a very strong fear that if businesses continued to sacrifice the general welfare in pursuit of short-term profits, long-term it would implode and take them all with it. It would be not worth it. So he forced them to the table to make them see that, and it wasn't easy. World War II, of course, happened. The U.S. was pulled into it through all kinds of fun things. You know this part, you know that part, but the part that generally isn't taught as much is that during the war, labor unions agreed to halt the work stoppages. They agreed to not go on strike. They agreed to take whatever they got in support of the war effort. Wildcat strikes, or unauthorized strikes, ones not authorized by a larger union, still occurred infrequently, but there were no major strikes. Additionally, pro-labor organizations and parties who might have otherwise, kind of been against American interventionism abroad, like, were definitely against it in World War I, and were still kind of about it, were very eager to fight fascism, which they perceived correctly as a direct threat to organized labor and politics associated with it, and also to defend countries that were being invaded that heavily supported these labor movements and that they supported in turn, to some degree or another. After the war, there was a strike wave. As soon as, the valve had been released, there was no longer the threat of war. Everyone was like, all right, here's the bill. Here's all the stuff we didn't tell you about, or that we didn't go on strike for. We want it now. Unfortunately, FDR kicked the bucket. Well, actually, I guess he didn't kick it, but he did something to the bucket, and now you had Truman, who was much less amicable to union interests and much less willing to bargain with them. Truman signed the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, and this is kind of considered the first nail in the coffin for, first major nail in the coffin for post-war American labor power. It sought to correct, quote-unquote, years of pro-labor New Deal programs and policies. It restricted unions' abilities to recruit, to raise dues, and to otherwise operate. It outlawed secondary strikes, or also called solidarity strikes, including general strikes. A solidarity strike is essentially when there is something going on in one company that causes their workers to strike, or that is bad for them. Workers somewhere else will also go on strike to say, hey, you, our boss, better put pressure on their boss to stop this. This is unfair to them. This act outlawed that practice. They have occurred since, but they have frequently been brought to court or arrested for it. It prevented so-called union shops, in which union membership could be compulsory for new employees. And it established so-called right-to-work rules and expanded the employer's ability to convince employees to not join unions. Right to work is a very nice and happy and fun way of framing what is essentially destroying a union's ability to recruit or raise dues, which it needs to be able to support its members, which are all of the workers. It's a very euphemistic phrase. It also prevented unions from making campaign contributions in federal elections for pro-labor candidates. So, you then had the post-war boom in the U.S. Yep, exactly. Wartime industry and the surge in the labor force from returning soldiers, combined with the complete destruction of industry in any other country, made the U.S. It gave it a pretty good head start. It was off to a good start. It was in the lead. It had a good, had a good thing going for it. Benefits and wages were generally still at their New Deal era heights, and it allowed a comfortable standard of living, but there's a big asterisk on that. It was, quote-unquote, good times if you were white, cis, straight male, or a member of their family. If you were even if you were a white, cis, straight woman, and you weren't married, this would not you had to be in that narrow confine. Anyone else was largely excluded from this. There were some, rising tide lifts all ships, but it doesn't lift it nearly as much as it did for some people. So that's a thing that will come back later on. You had racial segregation and the exclusion of non-whites from benefits, which prevented a sort of cross-racial labor movement from returning in force. Now that whites had it better, quote unquote, they were. Now that they had all of the benefits, they no longer felt it necessary for the time to bother helping anyone else. They had theirs. Unions were weaker now, but who cared anymore because they had their benefits. Everything was great. We won the war. Why bother? And cross-racial, crossing across these different imposed boundaries in social life is what fuels any sort of class solidarity. It's what builds the ability to make demands. You can buy off portions of the populace and prevent that from happening, is what this showed, at least for the time. There we go. Which was not good, and it would come back to bite them in the ass for it. So this was sort of the height of U.S. organized labor. The first, warning signs had been put in place, but they were just sort of peaking up there. In the 1960s, you get what's called the New Left. The Red Scare of the 1950s, which saw massive propaganda efforts and banning of political activities if you were or weren't a thing we didn't like, etc. And the civil rights movements of the 60s saw the rise of the quote-unquote New Left, which was an assortment of pro-labor and revolutionary organizations, including things like the Students for a Democratic Society. There was the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, etc. Groups like these formed around specific issues or ideas, but that generally held a similar politics to some degree or another, which was pro-labor, anti-capitalist. In this time, you saw these organized labor groups providing crucial support to civil rights organizations. Even the major unions, the big name ones like the AFL and the CIO, were strongly supportive of anti-discrimination laws against general legalized prejudice, things like that. They provided a ton of funding that was very important for the early civil rights movement. This poster, in fact, was from the late 40s, like they were on the boat pretty early in a lot of cases. And in the face of all of this, the U.S. government was not able to quell the demand for basic human dignity, for a large portion of its population any longer. And it had to, it was dragged to the table to do the right thing for once. But along the way, it got to demonize anyone who demanded those rights the wrong way, anyone it deemed threatening or scary. And because of the overlap in political ideologies between groups like the Black Panthers, the SDS, the Weather Underground, and even militant labor unions, organized labor began to take a hit in public perception as being rabble-rousers, as being troublemakers, as being part of this scary communist thing that was the Red Scare's legacy. Which then leads us into darker days for organized labor. So-called stagflation of the 1970s combined high inflation with an economic slowdown. Things got more expensive and people made less money simultaneously. And there was less economic growth, which is not fun. That tends to do things to the way an economy or even a country work. And businesses began to gut union powers to maintain their profits. Politicians like Reagan and Thatcher openly demonized unions, and each one of them did their own major bad thing. Reagan fired striking air traffic controllers and banned them from striking. Like, that position was not allowed to strike again until the 90s. He fired like 11,000 people across the country who were on strike. Thatcher, meanwhile, crushed the coal miners' strike of 1984 to 85 violently, and basically shut down that portion of the economy there. Very bad. Reagan further eliminated regulation and lowered taxes for the wealthy. This allowed a burgeoning finance industry to prosper where their only product was profit, quote-unquote, and it reduced the impact of declining labor power by replacing, the lowered ability to purchase things because of that economic downturn and because of lowering wages due to loss of things like unions, replaced it with the idea that, hey, just go get a credit card. Just go get a line of credit. If you want to make the economy get better, you have to spend money. So find money somewhere, even if it's from a volatile source. Even if it's from something that might ruin you in the long term. The 80s thus became a very decadent, very consumerist decade, and kind of has been ever since, because of this idea of just spend no matter what. It was the credit card boom. It was the era of, greed is good, to quote our then president. Everyone here, I'm assuming, has had at least one thing in their childhood where a parent brought up credit card debt. I'm willing to bet, if you lived in America, I know I did. I'm willing to bet that issue has come up at least once from people you thought were alright financially until they suddenly very much weren't. That was the legacy of the 80s mindset of just get a credit card. The 1990s sees what is called by historian Francis Fukuyama as the end of history. That is the end of the Cold War. It's the collapse of the USSR, of Eastern Bloc countries. It is the suddenly there's no longer the threat of foreigners funding, of scary foreign communists funding and powering labor unions and revolutions inside the West. Which means that now that there is no alternative, to quote Thatcher, to what we have is what you're stuck with. So your little union, it has no bargaining power now, if it had any at all left. This is where you really see the final major nails in the coffins of organized labor for the time. Now that you don't have any options, you can't say, well, hey, we might do a revolution if you don't stop. Well, now you don't have anyone to support you doing that, so what are you going to do? You're going to go on strike? We'll just fire you. So, you see the massive bottoming out of organized labor in this period. A decline that is, while beginning to reverse, still continuing. And simultaneously, coincidentally, that's weird, wealth inequality has been going up. So that's a weird thing that happens to coincide with the drop in organized labor. That's odd. Anyway, that's sort of that's your brief vibe check on the 20th century in organized labor. So what's so important about labor, right? Like, okay, they're workers. I feel bad if they don't get paid. But at the end of the day, why is there a holiday for them? Why do they need it? Why do they need a special day? Is it like their birthday? No. No. The point of an organized day like this, as was shown with the original intent of May 1st, which was in pursuit of the 8-hour work week, was to show all workers across the world coming out at once to make a demand, to show out in force. This is how many of us there are. This is how many of us are willing to go out in the streets to say that we are workers. This is a public display of what we can be and what we can do. And the biggest intentional downfall of North America and certain other countries, I believe Australia also doesn't celebrate International Workers' Day, is that it prevents some of the workers of the largest, economies, the largest, most, imperialist countries in the world from joining in that display of solidarity, from feeling a sense of, wow, we are part of something bigger. We can be bigger. There are more of us than there are of them. It sounds silly on its face. We, people my age, a little bit older and definitely younger, tend to look at that sort of thing without experiencing it and think, that's silly. That's just a vibe. Who cares? That's just, thoughts and feelings, man. Who gives it? Well, it does mean a lot when you can look out and see that people who have never met you, who will never meet you, who can't speak your language, understand the single constant in all of your lives, the unifying language that all of you speak, which is that you are not given what you are owed, ever. You look out in the world and you see everyone else has the exact same problem as you, and the people around the world are willing to come out and say that they've had enough of it. That can scare guys in suits. That is horrifying. That's partly why they did this in America, at least. It's scary to see people around the world coming up and agreeing that you suck and that they could do something about it if they wanted to. It gives you a more confident point of leverage from which to bargain if you are engaged in collective bargaining, because you can say, well, on this day, given, the ever-presence of information technology, we've made connections with groups in the countries where you buy your supplies. They might go on strike in solidarity with us and cut off both your supply and your workforce. It's all about forming connections with people across borders, and those kinds of connections have historically caused massive upheavals and changes. I mean, even things that would later on fail were helped immensely by organized labor. Even during world wars, especially during the First World War, there were instances of working class soldiers refusing to fire on one another because they recognized in each other that they were the same. I mean, a lot is said of, realizing you're both just ordinary people, but it's what makes a person ordinary that really isn't really defined. And what makes someone ordinary in our sense of the word is you both have to work to live. Not people who aren't ordinary don't do that. The ordinary person is a working person. That is what that means, even if we don't talk about it, because that's a less comfortable thing to put in a movie you're funding if you have millions of dollars. Workers' solidarity can pause wars. Workers' solidarity cause revolutions. Worker solidarity can change anything, really. Like, if all of the parts in your car stopped working, do you think you're gonna go anywhere? No. And it's not just me who thinks this way, and it's not just people online who say these things. Labor organizing, at least in the US and definitely around the world, though the rest of the world's been doing it a lot more than we have, is growing by leaps and bounds. They are trying to prevent that. If you look into anything about Starbucks or Amazon, or, well, I mean, the past few years, healthcare workers, teachers' strikes got really big in the early 2010s and have continued till today. Railroad workers who now legally cannot strike because they fear the power that those people could have if they put a pause on their work. All of these people are slowly waking up to the fact that, just as they did in the 20s, something's got to give, and they refuse to be that something. That we don't have to give anymore when we've already been giving everything. Their riches, their gold is built on our backs, you and me. It's been abstracted when it comes to people who make online content. Entertainment does not produce a concrete item anymore, but it remains true that no matter what you do, whether it's online or whether it's in a factory or whether it's making someone's Starbucks order, that what you do is at the behest of someone else, and they could shut off the funnel that you need to live at any moment if they felt that you weren't being profitable enough. If YouTube cut my channel tomorrow, I would be looking for a job. All of this is to say, no matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter where you work, do your best to make it through your day, but try to connect with fellow workers. I know it sucks. I know a lot of them are assholes. I know a lot of them have backwards ideas, but if you can safely, somewhat comfortably find common ground with them, if you can find ways to make inroads into people at work, or people in your life who, for some reason or other, don't understand that they are the ones being exploited and the person exploiting them is not the person in the cubicle next to them. If you have the kind of position that I used to have at my job, where I pass as a cis white guy, I could talk to the cis white guys who said horrendous shit in front of me, and you can bend them to understand certain things. And yeah, it is very hard to contend with the fact that we are taught to be replaceable, that we are made atomized. We are made to be a tiny part of a larger machine that can be swapped out at any moment. That is true, which is why unionization, done quietly, don't say this shit in front of your boss, for the love of God. Unionization to ensure that you cannot be replaced easily is so important. Why it's so constantly, ever-presently necessary to build a support network. People, it's so easy to dismiss unions as, oh, I don't want to pay extra money for that. It used to be described as one hour of work or one paycheck of work of a month to fund your union. That union due, that pays for, well, I mean, at the very worst, it pays strike fees, it pays legal fees, it makes sure that the union can operate in your best interests. And if your boss is working so hard to tell you not to unionize, to beg and plead and take you off, to make you not do that, to literally give you individually better benefits than they would anyone in the union just to make sure you don't join that union, why do you think they're doing that? Do you really think that your boss cares about you enough that they're trying so hard to prevent you from joining that scary union that's bad for you? No. They understand that a union, long term, is worse for their bottom line than giving you an extra $10 a day. It is hard to find and join unions. There are not many. If they are available, I I cannot help but recommend it. They help. And building this sort of shared consciousness of who we are as workers, as people at the bottom of the pyramid, as people who do not have the power to change things on our own, who don't get to sit and get invited to talk on every single 24-hour cable network possible just because we happen to have a lot of money and a recognizable face. We don't have power as individuals. We don't. You alone are not anything. We're not. Neither is an ant. But do you find it very fun when you stick your foot in an ant hill? Do you find it, enjoyable when you try to step on one ant and 50 come swarming out after you to defend it or to avenge it? Labor power doesn't just come with a bottom line analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of what is good for me at the dollar value amount. Labor power is formed from an understanding of each other as something greater than ourselves. It comes from an understanding of life as more than just trying to get through the day. It is formed when people come together, understand each other's problems, the shared struggles that we all have, and work toward fixing them. Sure, we can bitch about them online. I know I do. But when we just stop there, when we don't try to do anything to spread that idea, to implant that idea in someone else's head and maybe work with them towards something better, nothing happens. It's only by coming together and understanding that we are all in the same boat, rapidly sinking boat, that we can make our lives better. There is one second. There is a rather annoying transphobic lobster man whose favorite phrase when it comes to his self-help drivel is, clean your room first before you try to affect anyone else. Get your own house in order. You can't criticize or critique anything around you until you fix yourself. Bullshit. You can't clean your own room if your neighbor's room is on fire. You have to work together to fix each other's problems. That's how this all works. That's how it's always worked. Anyone selling anything otherwise probably has a dollar stake in you believing it. All that. Talk to each other. Reach out across distances to people you would never talk to. Find common ground. Find people who think and feel at some level similar to you, because we all do. At some level, we all understand what it's like to have bills due. We all understand what it's like to be called into the boss's office. We all understand what it's like to have our bills go up. There are organizations that exist to try to facilitate these kinds of conversations, but they aren't necessary. They're helpful. There are organizations that try to help or support any labor movement that they can. Some of these include the IWW, which is the International Workers of the World, which is a large, very large international union. The AFL-CIO is kind of slowly returning to its more radical roots. At the political level in the U.S., the DSA and the PSL are very frequently seen at pro-labor protests and strikes. You can almost always find flags and banners that they've printed on their own, with their URL on them, of course, being handed out to people who already showed up for their own reasons. These organizations aren't going to build a union for you, but they have resources that can help. They have communities that can help. You can talk to people in these organizations. You could even go to the National Labor Relations Board with complaints if your boss or your workplace are treating you unfairly. That's in the U.S. at least. If you're being exploited or you feel like you are being unfairly treated, there are places to go. I mean, hell, easiest resources you can probably find is to just search back through Jorts the Cat's Twitter account and find some posts in there that'll show you whatever you need to know. all of this is to say that we don't really have anything going for us if we don't try to change things in the world around us. I don't work in a workplace anymore. This is the best I can do at the moment. I would like to contribute towards something else. So the best I can be is an attempt at a propagandist. Sneaking it in with all the ASMR and the history drivel. We don't really have much else left to lose at this point, given our economic situation, given our ecological situation, given our technological situation. There's not much left to lose but our chains. Any questions? I muted my mic, and then immediately my loop deck came unplugged, so I had to plug it back in before I could unmute myself. Very funny. And yes, I found it very hard to avoid the urge to put a remix of Solidarity Forever at the end of this, just because it's an ASMR stream. That is so loud over my monitor. Wow. Not your fault. Just very funny. Yeah, I had to fight very hard to not put that in here. So, any ideas, any comments, any questions about history? I just broke my water bottle. Why? Yes, I will. One moment. See, that's why I brought 2 water bottles, just in case. Okay. Alright. Yeah. Okay. Corporations will do everything. Oh, let's see. Yeah, double fisting water bottles. Yeah, it is very hard to get your foot in the door in places. It is very difficult. I'm not trying to downplay that. It was hard enough for me to get there, and I still ended up quitting because, well, that job was quite literally killing me. And I only had 3 people with whom I could possibly network to unionize. There are situations in which the company has quite solidly stacked the cards in your favor against you, and there may not be something you can do about it. All I'm saying is, if you're in the position where you can, try. Give it a try. Not even do anything official. Just talk to people. Be like, this is why it's very useful for me to learn this kind of history on my own time. It's because it gives me things to relate to people who are older than me. Like, I've talked to my grandfather about his perception of how things have gone economically and the job market, socially even, and tied them to the decline of, especially, basically labor power in a way that he said he hadn't really thought about before. I'm not saying I gave him some grand realization or anything, but like, they already know this stuff, they just haven't connected dots in some ways. And if you can find what parts of their history that they relate to the most, you can connect it for them. I had coworkers who were big into sci-fi, and you could connect it was fun for me to point out the, sort of techno-libertarians of the 60s and 70s who wrote sci-fi envisioned for space travel, and then point out how stupid it looks in real life when idiots like Elon Musk and Bezos try it. It's funny, it's minor, it's not even really directly tied to labor, but it opens up a conversation of, wow, that guy is an idiot, you're right. Maybe they're not so smart. Maybe billionaires don't have our best interests at heart. Maybe they're not actually captains of industry. Maybe they are robber barons. I'm not saying go out and start a union today or anything like that. I'm saying be open to the idea of minor conversations that build up a sense of shared experience with people. On the question of how they use intimidation, corporations have a lot of things they can do to you, especially in the U.S. Oh, got some burps. Okay. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Corporations can intimidate you. They claim that they can't, but here's the biggest thing to remember for any sort of labor regulation when it comes to corporations preventing you from taking action as an employee. When it comes to unionization laws, they can try something. And you can look at this. You can look at Starbucks for the past 2 years and see exactly this. And if they get caught, you have to take them to court. And if you win, do you know what they have to do? Do you know what they lose? They lose anything they've cost you in that time. They don't get a fine. There's no fine. They just have to pay back what they cost you. So there's literally no loss to this for them. At best, they don't have to pay you. At worst, they gotta pay back what they were already gonna pay you. Corporations can use what are called captive meetings, which are things that they say are required of employees that will vilify unions and are in some ways illegal to a certain extent. But what are you gonna do if you're one person? They're very blatantly full of lies too. But they'll phrase it as, we just want you to be able to represent yourself when it comes to bargaining. We don't want some third party getting involved. The funny thing about that being that most of the third party are other people who work there, and also you, because you're part of the union. They try to make it sound as if the union is taking away your control and your power, and they're speaking on your behalf, and it's like, no. You're part of that thing. It's you speaking with the voices of others as well. It's very silly. They will try to do things like Amazon did, where they will try to contest and mess with and interfere with union elections, because a union, to be certified as legally representing employees in a company, they have to collect a vote, and they have to be certified by the NLRB. Again, this is all in the U.S. And they will do everything in their power to tamper with that. Because again, what do they have to lose? Like, the laws do not, ever since Taft-Hartley, they do not have the power to really do anything other than, like, wag their finger disapprovingly at companies. I'm not a big fan of electoral politics because I see it as a dead end in a country like this. However, if there is any sort of politician running in your jurisdiction who has a at least somewhat proven track record or solid evidence of their action on the issue, who is trying to improve issues for workers, especially when it comes to concrete things like giving the NLRB more funding, more power, more ability to actually go after bad actors, I would be tempted to vote for them. I don't get many of those down here in Louisiana because we're not a lot of pro-union stuff down here. But if that ever comes across your desk, I'd recommend it. Let me see. look up, if you want more examples of what companies can do to you to prevent you from unionizing or taking any sort of power back in your workplace, you can literally, as a bonus points for the first student, just look up news articles regarding Starbucks' behavior for the past 2 years toward unionizing employees. It is horrifying. Some of the things they do specifically to like really young people, like maybe to me, like making an 18 or 19-year-old cry because she tried to get better wages, dragging her in one-on-one, and mostly they're not crying because they're upset or afraid. They're crying, you can tell, it's because they're upset and they're angry. It's the sense of powerlessness. You just have to sit there and take it. I experienced that a lot in my own job. You sit there knowing that what they're doing is illegal, that they are psychologically traumatizing you because they can, because they don't want you to do the thing you're doing for your own best interests. It's a righteous anger, and it can cause strong emotions. Yeah, you can also find employee testimonials. What made me decide to make this stream? I'd never made one like it, but I realized what day it was, and I thought a while back, I thought that I wanted to do something for today, and I had not planned anything until 2 days ago. I was falling asleep. And then yesterday, I started to get things together for it, and then I accidentally reset my phone when I went to manually update it. So I spent several hours just getting my stuff back on my phone. Not back, setting my apps back up on the phone the way I like it. So mostly, most of this PowerPoint was assembled today. Fun time. There are also, as I've said before, there are a lot of gaps in my knowledge because I only know things predominantly about the US. There are lots of good books on the history of declining labor that show you kind of what to do and what not to do when it comes to these kinds of things. There are also just generally interesting books about exploitation of the global south, because as weird and as seemingly disconnected as that might seem to issues like labor and unionization, it's two sides of the same coin. It is the same system producing both forms of exploitation and just doing it in different ways. For that, there are books like Open Veins in Latin America. There are books like The Jakarta Method, which shows the extent to which people allied with the rich will go to prevent a country doing anything close to empowering the people who live there against exploitation. People's History of the United States is a classic. Like, I need to make like a proper book. I've got the list of the books I own, but I need to make like an actual proper book list of good books. But next, once I get back into reading, because I haven't been reading in so long, I need to read. There was a book I was looking at called something like Reconstruction, America's something revolution. Like, it was almost something like that. I'm generally interested in this kind of history. Started out as an interest in the Cold War, and then expanded into all of this. It's very fascinating to me. There's a book called Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, which is very good in the modern context to explore how neoliberalism, the scary word, works. There's also a book called A Brief History of Neoliberalism, which is also good. Yeah, a lot of these things. And I would definitely love to make more of these once I can figure out good angles for them and plan them better than this. Yeah. That's a big one, especially here in the South. There's a common misconception because of the past 100 years or so where the promotion of the Confederacy and of the so-called lost cause and just more openly discriminatory and prejudiced times in history have been disseminated down into southern working class people. You know, it's been an uneducated redneck who is wearing the Confederate flag, etc. That was not always the case. It's a very fun thing. The Civil War was incredibly unpopular down here for anyone who wasn't a plantation owner and therefore had to fight in it. There are records of Appalachian, moonshine type, become moonshiners in Appalachia. They didn't own slaves because they lived up in the mountains. There was no economic reason to do it, in addition to them probably not thinking it was very good, because unless you had a very shrewd, vile way of thinking about your own self-interest, slavery was generally seen as abhorrent. They basically practiced an early form of guerrilla warfare within the Confederacy for a lot of the Civil War. Entire infantry units of Confederate soldiers would desert and turn themselves over to the Union. Mark Twain was in one of them that did that. A lot of this stems from a lot of white sharecroppers who were poor, probably had more in common with recently freed slaves who then became sharecroppers than they would have liked. And that fear of being so close to the bottom that now these people have just moved up a peg and we're closer to you. What if they overtake you? The rich, the former leaders of the Confederacy, the people who rode around very people remember this, the first Klan, there have been 2 or 3 major waves of the Klan, were mostly rich plantation owners, just dandies who did this awful, like Nathan Bedford Forrest, whatever his name. They were fancy lads who did this horrendous shit. The original Klan and original, lost cause types weren't rednecks. Rednecks, hell, they get their name from the red flags they wore, or the red bandanas they wore, and the sunburn they got working in the field, and the red bandanas being pro-labor. There's a lot to the South that doesn't get explained very well, and I would hope that something like 13th probably helps to clear some of that up, but it's a fun tangent to go on. Essentially, the Civil War was not a very popular thing if you were not a rich white guy who owned human beings. Because if you weren't that, then why the hell were you bothering to fight? Like, it was of no point to you. Unless they could instill some kind of stupid civic pride in their, 2-month-old country. Yeah, Bacon's Rebellion is also very interesting, as is Burning Kansas. Lots of fun history at that point in time, which I have not done as much research into as I have the 20th century, because that is more directly of interest to me, but it's interesting nonetheless. Anyone else got any interesting questions, comments, complaints, vitriolic statements against my character? Haven't got any of those yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. I appreciate the smart part, not the stinky part. I try. I would like to feel that I learned something good. 2019, this is going to sound very silly because it is. In 2019, I graduated college expecting that I had a job lined up. I didn't. That wasn't the direct cause of this. That's later. So I instead spent most of the summer working on little projects for myself and being bored while I looked for jobs. This is before 2020, which would have made more sense, honestly. I found myself watching lots of YouTube videos, and eventually I fell down a rabbit hole of increasingly informative content. Then I worked for a while as a pizza delivery guy, which tends to put you in a relatively diverse crowd, because it doesn't have, a specific minimum requirements like education or anything. So we had everyone from college students to two grandmothers working there. Then I got a job working in a hospital that I started, in IT, in a hospital that I started 2 weeks before lockdowns began. And that sucked my life out of me for several years. Not a pleasant time. Very much not a pleasant time. Yeah, I was having to try to explain what a severe case of COVID looks like because I had to fix a computer in an ICU. So I was trying to explain it to other people to try to impart the severity of it on them. That was fun. Yeah, for the extra fun for the non-Americans in the chat, in a private hospital, a hospital company, like McDonald's is like a chain, a food chain. This is a hospital chain where every time you go to the hospital, you get a large bill. Don't worry, they're legally not allowed to not treat you, but they will charge you. Yeah, I remember making Corona jokes. Yeah, that hospital's not fun. Yeah, the American medical system is an abomination. I don't know that place, and I would not tell you where I worked if I did. Yeah. I just worked in a fun-filled hospital company, which, honestly would deserve one of these of its own, but yeah, not a good place. None of those places are. And the thing about those places is that because you have to be like the most soulless person in the world to decide exactly how much to charge someone for something life-saving, the only people who get to the topmost decision-makingest positions in a company like that are the most reprehensible human beings imaginable. Just cold-blooded vultures. And they will be the ones who manage your life horribly, mismanage your life, can't even do their evil efficiently or effectively. So, yeah, no, 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. Good people, though. I mean, okay, the people I worked with, not even my manager, like my immediate manager, awful, micromanaging, paranoid. But, and they hired him for that. Like, they put him in that position because they liked that about him. But my coworkers and the nurses I talked to, even the ones who annoyed me, good people. Yeah. That was basically the main thing I missed about leaving there, was nothing other than the people I worked with. And they were not good people, by the way. Like, I don't say this to romanticize some of the people I worked with. One of them had truly reprehensible social views. Truly. Not a Nazi or anything, but definitely 40-year-old, height complex, easily angered. But you could see, and the type who, while he would criticize someone like Tucker Carlson as being too annoying and loud, a lot of the same thought processes, or a lot of the same ideas as someone who follows him, just without the spine or the interest in actually going out and saying those views. I'm not romanticizing the guy. He had bad views on things, period. I appreciated him in what ways that I could, and as a coworker, he was good. As a person who begrudgingly, because he did have a very grumpy personality, would do whatever he could to get a job done, even if he hated every second of it, who would be very loyal to his coworkers, even if he got in arguments with them, he was good. And I could talk to him in certain ways to get him to say or agree to certain things that he hadn't thought about before without him realizing he'd done it, which was fun. And he wasn't dumb, it's just that we're not taught to think certain things as being connected. No, it was not Squidward. Did I miss any questions or comments earlier? I keep on getting on tangents. I don't think I did. Were there any other things from the crowd to lob at me? Yep, I did. I needed more, like runner games playing in the background, and like someone playing with slime in another part of the screen in the background, just to keep everyone entertained. Oh, yeah. Creator Union. That's been floated before. And there was an attempt, there was a thought that there could be a walkout, quote unquote. But the problem with that is it doesn't work the same way. specifically with YouTube, but for a lot of things. If we all agreed to stop making content, YouTube still has all our content. It still has trillions of hours of content, including the stuff we've made as people who are quote-unquote leaving it. There would not be anything to be gained from that sort of thing. In the same way, it doesn't employ us in the traditional sense, so it doesn't work. If it doesn't recognize that it employs us in the traditional sense, then it can't really be bargained with in that sense, in the way a union would. Because then we'd say, okay, we're collectively wanting to bargain with you, YouTube, and they would say, what the hell? Y'all just make videos and put it on our website. We don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't think that like people at YouTube are like rubbing their hands together and thinking, ha ha ha, we're pretending that they don't work for us, but actually they do. Like, I think they genuinely think of themselves as a platform that hosts content. It's just that the nature of the way their platform works means that we have to conform to certain ideas and conform to certain formats and conform to certain ways of speaking that we might not otherwise. Yeah, the creator walkout, they've tried it before. It didn't really do much. You could make the argument that there weren't enough people who did it, but the sheer size of a company like YouTube and the sheer disconnect, like if there's no coworker to talk to at a place like YouTube. You can find bonds to make with people, but they're not made in the same way that a worker makes, that you make connections with other employees. There are similarities in your experiences that you can talk about, and that could turn into something. I don't know if it would be a union, but something. But, they only process your taxes if it's a different kind of tax form. It's not the same form as an employment. It's what was it called? It's the tax form used for like rewards or for like, I forgot how it's called. They don't process the taxes the way that an employer would. I don't get a W-2 or anything from them. Well, YouTube isn't really niche. In fact, it's the opposite. There's too much of it. It's like, YouTube gives the same tax form that like Twitch does. Like and I think it's under a certain amount of money, and even over it, I don't think it's a W-2. Like, that's what I mean when they don't process themselves as being an employer. Jesus, that scared the hell out of me. Okay. Like, they don't work the way an employer does. The apparatus by which they control what is made on their platform feels and functions similar to these sort of unspoken ways that an employer enforces their will on their employees, but it doesn't work in the same paradigm. Wouldn't it be a self-employed form? Well, I mean, I do file taxes as a self-employed person, but I receive I don't have a company that I run. I just receive taxable income from these different sites. If that makes sense. It's very bizarre. I do pay a self-employment. I do pay a self-employed tax, but I don't have to file it as a company. If that makes sense. I just work for myself, or I don't work for it. It's weird. It's very confusing. But yeah, no, platforms like that don't see themselves as employers. I would say companies like Grubhub and Uber Eats see themselves far more as employers and operate more as them than something like YouTube does. Yeah, it's a weird gray area, and they are very likely reticent to try to update the tax code on behalf of small self-employed people because, fun fact, companies don't like you being self-employed. They want to force you to come work for them, which is why there is a 15% self-employment tax in this country. Which I'm not saying taxes are bad, period. I'm saying the way this country does them is bad. They don't pay them, I do. That's bad. Yeah, well, it's seen as like a gift, like a, I don't know how to phrase it. I forget which letter form it is. It's so confusing. Yeah, you can see that kind of thing with how quickly they added things for like crypto to the tax code, but not for things like self-employment, content creation, digital media. Things like those aren't quickly updated. But crypto is seen as a thing that could very quickly make some very rich guys even richer. So, of course, that got written in very quickly. Oh, it's always been cursed to me. Just, yeah. But yeah. It's been, let's see, an hour and a half since the start of this timer. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it and take a cough drop because whispering for a long time makes your throat very ouchy. So, I whispered so hard. See, I'm gonna go pop a cough drop, take a walk, and then figure out what else I'm gonna do this evening. So, thank y'all so much for showing up. I hope y'all have a lovely time. I'll try and get this on YouTube soon. It might work as an ASMR, just go on the main channel or something, I don't know, but I did say that. I did say it's whispering time, and I whispered all over the place. That's what I said at the beginning of the stream. Anyone who wasn't here at the beginning, that's exactly what I said. And I'll dub it in if I didn't. Alrighty. Y'all have a lovely day. If you like these kinds of things, I don't know how to finish the sentence. If I had a wave, there's no likes on Twitch. Damn it. Okay. If this goes on YouTube, if you like this kind of thing, hit like. Do that. Alright. Y'all have a lovely time. Bye-bye.